Someone says something to you. Maybe it's a colleague who undermines you in front of others. Maybe it's a family member who knows exactly which words will cut the deepest. Maybe it's a stranger who decides, for reasons you'll never fully understand, that today is the day they'll make you feel small. And in that moment, that terrible electric moment, you feel it rising. The heat in your chest, the tightening in your jaw, the voice in your head screaming at you to say something, to defend yourself, to win. And so you do. You say something back. And maybe you win the argument. Maybe you silence them for a second or two. But then you drive home and you replay the whole thing, and somehow you feel worse. Not better, worse. Like you lost something you can't quite name. Here's what nobody tells you. The sharpest, most powerful response you can ever give to someone who is trying to diminish you, provoke you, or break you down is almost never the first thing that comes to your mind. The Stoics knew this. They built an entire philosophy around it. And today I'm going to give you 7 responses, not clever comebacks, not manipulative tricks, but intelligent, psychologically powerful ways of speaking that will disarm the most difficult people in your life, protect your peace, and leave others genuinely speechless. Stay with me. By the end of this video, you will never argue the same way again. Before we begin, I want you to understand something important about what we're really talking about today. This is not a video about winning arguments. If that's what you're looking for, I'd encourage you to think a little more deeply about why winning feels so necessary. Because the Stoics would tell you, and they'd be right, that the desperate need to win every verbal confrontation is itself a symptom of a mind that hasn't yet found its own center. What we're really talking about today is sovereignty. Inner sovereignty. The ability to remain fully yourself, calm, clear, and unshaken, when the world around you is trying to pull you off balance. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who commanded legions and governed millions, wrote his private philosophical notes to himself, what we now call the Meditations, and he came back to one idea again and again. He wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength is not the strength of someone who shouts louder or cuts deeper. That strength is the quiet, immovable certainty of someone who knows exactly who they are and refuses to become less of themselves just because someone else wants them to. That is what these 7 responses are built on, not tactics. Philosophy. The philosophy of men and women who were tested in fires we can barely imagine and came through them, not broken, but refined. Let's begin. Now, before we get into the 7 responses themselves, I want to explain the single Stoic principle that underlies all of them. Because without this foundation, these responses are just techniques. With it, they become something far more powerful. They become an expression of who you are. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most liberating ideas in the entire history of human thought. Epictetus, who was born a slave, who lived his early life in chains, who had no freedom, no property, no rights. Epictetus understood something that most emperors and kings never learned. He wrote in the Enchiridion, "Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and in a word, whatever are not our own actions." Read that again. Let it land. What someone says to you, not in your control. How they say it, not in your control. Whether they respect you, whether they understand you, whether they choose to treat you with dignity, none of that is in your control. But your response? Your response is entirely, completely, inviolably yours. And this is where it gets interesting. Because the moment you truly internalize this, not just intellectually, but in your body, in your nervous system, the moment you feel it, everything changes. You stop trying to control what people think of you. You stop trying to manage their reactions. You stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight. And you start doing the only thing that has ever actually worked. You become unshakable. That is the soil from which these 7 responses grow. Keep that in mind as we move through each one. Asterisk response 1. The silence that speaks. Let's start with the most counterintuitive response of all. And I promise you, when you understand why this works, not just that it works, you will never feel the urge to fill every silence out of discomfort again. When someone attacks you, verbally, emotionally, socially, the single most powerful thing you can do in that first moment is nothing at all. Silence. Complete, deliberate, unhurried silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that most people walk right past without really seeing it. He wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed. It is the person who continues in his self-deception and ignorance who is harmed." Now notice what he's doing there. He's not saying he'll immediately respond. He's not saying he'll defend himself. He's saying he'll evaluate. He's saying the truth matters more than his comfort, more than his ego, more than his reputation in this moment. That takes space. That takes science. The Roman world was loud, brutal, and political. Marcus Aurelius sat at its very center, constantly surrounded by people who wanted something from him, who flattered him, who tried to manipulate him, who tested him. And he learned, through years of philosophical discipline, that the first words out of his mouth in a charged moment were almost never his best words. The silence was where his power lived. Here's what silence does psychologically. When someone provokes you, when they say something cutting, dismissive, or deliberately unkind, they are, on some level, expecting a reaction. The provocation is designed to produce one. It's a lever. They pull it, and the expected response is that you fall forward, you justify, you explain, you defend. The moment you refuse to do that, the moment you simply look at them, steady and still, the lever breaks. The entire dynamic shifts. Because now they've revealed something about themselves, and you've revealed nothing. They've spent energy, and you spent none. They're waiting for a reaction that isn't coming. And that silence, that calm, collected, totally unperturbed silence, is louder than anything you could possibly say. Think of the great Stoic teacher Cato the Younger. Plutarch records that when Cato's political enemies spread vicious rumors about him in the Roman Senate, calling him corrupt, dishonest, unfit for office, Cato's response was not a lengthy defense, not a public refutation, not a counterattack. He simply continued being exactly who he was. He showed up to the Senate. He did his work. He lived by his principles. And in doing so, he allowed the rumors to collapse under the weight of their own dishonesty. His silence was not weakness. His silence was the statement. The statement was, "I am not afraid of what you say about me, because I know who I am." Now think about your own life. Think about the last time someone said something that stung. Something unfair, something designed to make you feel smaller. What if you had simply paused? Not forever, not permanently, just paused. What if instead of rushing to defend yourself, you had taken one long, slow breath and looked at them with calm, clear eyes and said absolutely nothing for 5 full seconds? It would have felt uncomfortable. I know, silence almost always does, but that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is working. Here is your reflection question for this response. The next time someone provokes you, can you give yourself the gift of 5 seconds of silence before you say a single word? Not to be rude, not to be cold. Simply to let the noise settle, so that when you do speak, you speak from your center, not from your wound. Asterisk response 2, the honest question. But here's what most people miss. Silence is powerful, but there comes a moment when you do need to speak. And what you say and how you say it, in that moment, will determine everything. The second response is what I call the honest question. And it is, in many ways, the most disarming thing you can do to someone who is trying to put you on the defensive. Instead of explaining, instead of explaining, instead of justifying, instead of counterattacking, you ask a question. But not just any question, a real one, a calm one, a question that demonstrates something far more threatening to your aggressor than anger ever could, genuine curiosity. Something like this. "That's interesting. What makes you say that?" Or, Help me understand what you mean by that. Or even simply, can you say more about that? Now watch what happens. Because this is where it gets interesting. Seneca wrote in one of his famous letters to his friend Lucilius, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And this line, as brilliant as it is, points to something else, something about the nature of conflict itself. Most of what people say in anger or in contempt is not fully formed thought. It's reaction. It's emotion wearing the costume of argument. And when you ask it to explain itself, clearly, calmly, with genuine curiosity, it often can't. The question does something remarkable. It says, "I'm not afraid of what you just said. I don't need to defend myself from it. I'm genuinely interested in whether it has any merit, and if it does, I want to hear it. And if it doesn't, well, we'll both find out together, won't we?" There's a famous story about Epictetus and a young student who came to him frustrated that a classmate had spoken badly of him in public. The student wanted advice on how to respond. He expected Epictetus to give him clever arguments, sharp words, ways to humiliate the classmate in return. Instead, Epictetus asked the student a question. He said, "Did he tell the truth?" The student was caught completely off guard. He sputtered and said, "Well, partly maybe, but that wasn't the point." And Epictetus said, "Then if he told the truth, there is nothing to defend. And if he lied, his words will reveal themselves in time. Either way, you have nothing to fear from honest inquiry." The student thought he needed a weapon. What he needed was a question. Think about your own conflicts. How many of them have escalated not because the original grievance was so serious, but because both people immediately went into defense mode? Because no one was willing to be the first to stop defending long enough to genuinely ask, what are we actually talking about here? The honest question creates a pause in the middle of the storm. And in that pause, something remarkable becomes possible. Understanding, sometimes even resolution. And even if understanding doesn't come, even if the other person is so deeply committed to their position that no question will reach them, you have still demonstrated something important. You demonstrated that you are not reactive. You are not desperate. You are not easily provoked. You are the kind of person who can hear something uncomfortable and meet it with curiosity instead of fear. That is a rare quality. And people, even your opponents, recognize it consciously or not. It commands respect. Your reflection question for this response: is there a conflict in your life right now where you have been defending yourself so vigorously that you have never actually stopped to ask the other person, genuinely, humbly, curiously, what they mean? What would change if you did? Quote, Response 3. The unexpected agreement, ask. Now the Stoics understood something deeper here, something that might, at first, feel like weakness, but is, in fact, one of the most sophisticated psychological moves available to a disciplined mind. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the most powerful response is to agree, not to capitulate, not to surrender your values or your self-respect, but to genuinely, honestly, and voluntarily acknowledge what is true and what someone has said about you, even when it stings, even when the way they said it was cruel, even when they were trying to hurt you rather than help you. This is what the Stoics called voluntary discomfort. The practice of deliberately embracing difficult things, not because you enjoy suffering, but because in doing so you rob those things of their power over you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him that performed the injury." And here he's pointing to something subtle and profound. The person who attacks you is expecting a mirror. They want you to reflect their energy back at them, to match their anger, their contempt, their defensiveness. When you instead respond with honesty and calm acknowledgement, you break the mirror, and they are left staring at their own reflection alone. Let me give you a practical example. Someone tells you, perhaps publicly, perhaps harshly, that you made a mistake, that your work fell short, that you were wrong about something. The conditioned response, the ego response, is to deflect, explain, or justify. To soften it, to contextualize it, to make the mistake less of a mistake. But what if you said instead, "You're right, I did get that wrong. Thank you for pointing it out." That's it. No qualifications, no counterattacks, No attempts to diminish what you just acknowledged. Just clean, simple, dignified agreement. Watch what that does. The person who was expecting a fight suddenly has no fight. The person who was expecting defensiveness is met instead with openness. It's disarming in a way that no clever argument can match, because you've taken away the one thing they were counting on, your resistance. There is a story told of Marcus Aurelius and the court at Rome. A senator, one of those political animals whose entire existence was organized around positioning and power, confronted the emperor in front of others with a criticism that was partly political maneuvering, partly personal attack, and partly buried somewhere beneath the malice actually true. Marcus didn't rise to the bait. He didn't use his power to silence the man. He reportedly looked at him for a moment and said, in effect, "You've pointed to something real, and I'm grateful for it." The senator, who had prepared himself for a battle, found himself instead in a conversation. The room, which had tensed, expecting an imperial rebuke, relaxed. The moment became a lesson, not in how to crush your enemies, but in how to outgrow the need to have them. But, and this is critical, the unexpected agreement only works when it is genuine. The moment it becomes a technique, a strategy, a way to appear wise while actually just maneuvering, it loses all its power. People are sensitive to inauthenticity. They can smell it. The Stoics would be horrified by the idea of using philosophy as a tool for social manipulation. The goal is not to seem calm. The goal is to become it. Your reflection question: is there a criticism of you, one that perhaps came delivered in an unfair or unkind way, that contains a kernel of truth you haven't yet been willing to honestly acknowledge? What would it feel like to simply agree? Not out of weakness, out of honesty. Out of honesty. Hust. Response 4. The philosophical redirect. But before we continue, I want to make something clear. Not every response needs to engage with the content of what someone has said. Some conversations are not actually about what they appear to be about, and recognizing this, being able to see beneath the surface of a conflict to what is actually driving it, is a form of wisdom that the Stoics considered essential. The fourth response is what I call the philosophical redirect, and it requires you to do something that is genuinely difficult in the heat of a moment, to care more about truth than about being right. Epictetus taught his students in Nicopolis in a school that was open to anyone, rich or poor, powerful or humble, and one of the things he returned to again and again was this idea. When someone is behaving badly toward you, the question you should be asking is not, "How do I respond to this?" but rather, what is happening inside this person that is producing this behavior? Not out of weakness, not as a way to excuse what they're doing, but as an act of genuine philosophical curiosity. Because when you understand what is driving a person's hostility or cruelty or dismissiveness, you have information that changes everything. You are no longer dealing with a problem. You are now dealing with a person. The philosophical redirect sounds something like this. It sounds like there's something deeper going on here. I'd be interested to talk about that, if you're open to it. Or, I don't think this is really about the thing we're talking about, is it? Or even, more gently, what's actually bothering you? It takes courage to say these things, because when you redirect a conversation to its real source, you're naming something that the other person may not have even admitted to themselves. You're pulling back the curtain, and that can feel threatening to them. But here's what I've observed again and again in the way philosophy intersects with real human psychology. Most of the hostility and cruelty and passive aggression and verbal attack that happens between people has very little to do with the apparent subject of the conflict. It is almost always about something underneath: fear, shame, unmet needs, old wounds, unprocessed grief. The person who lashes out at you in a meeting is often not angry about the meeting. The family member who cuts you down at the dinner table is often not angry about the thing they appear to be angry about. The Stoics understood this not from psychology textbooks, but from a clear-eyed observation of human nature. Seneca wrote, in one of the most compassionate passages of his letters, "Let us be gentle with the people who make mistakes, and be mindful of how often we ourselves have erred or will err. When you redirect a conversation to its real source, you are doing exactly this. You are being gentle, not soft, not a pushover, but genuinely gentle, with another human being who is, in some way, suffering. And you are refusing to take their suffering personally, which is perhaps the greatest gift you can give both of you. Think of the last time someone was inexplicably harsh with you. Think of the energy it took to defend yourself. Now imagine that instead of defending, you had looked at them, really looked, and gently asked, "What's really going on?" I can't promise it would have worked. Some people are not ready for that conversation. But I can tell you this, you would have left that interaction with your dignity entirely intact and with perhaps more information about another human being than you've had before. And that information might matter more than you realize. Your reflection question: is there someone in your life whose hostility you have been treating as a conflict to win when it might actually be a wound asking to be seen? What would it mean? What would it cost you to respond to the wound instead of the weapon? Response 5. The value declaration. Now we arrive at something that requires not just discipline, but genuine self-knowledge. Because you cannot declare your values clearly and calmly if you don't actually know what your values are. The fifth response is the value declaration, and it is the response you reach for when someone is not just saying something unkind, but actively trying to pressure you into being someone you are not. Not an argument, not a lecture, not a defense. Just a calm, clear, unhurried statement of what you stand for. It sounds like this: "That's not something I'm willing to do," or "That doesn't align with how I want to live," or simply and powerfully, "I understand why you'd see it that way. I see it differently." Marcus Aurelius wrote, and this is one of the most quietly radical things he ever set down: never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Never. Not the approval of powerful people, not political advantage, not social comfort, nothing. He was an emperor. He had people telling him what he should do, should say, should think, should become, every single day of his life. People who depended on him for their livelihoods, their status, their very survival. The pressure to bend, to accommodate, to give people what they wanted must have been enormous. And yet he wrote in his private notes, again and again, "Your soul is yours. It is the only thing that is truly yours. Guard it accordingly." The value declaration is, at its heart, a protection of that inner life. It is you saying to another person, "I see you, I hear you, I am not afraid of your disapproval, and I am still going to be exactly who I am." There is a remarkable historical account of Cato the Younger. That man again, that iron-willed practitioner of Stoic virtue, when Julius Caesar, at the height of his power, offered Cato political favor in exchange for Cato softening his opposition. Caesar was offering him something real, something that would have made Cato's life materially easier, safer, more comfortable. Cato refused, not dramatically, not with a speech. He simply said, in effect, "I cannot be your friend under these conditions, because to be your friend would require me to become someone I cannot be." Caesar, reportedly, was genuinely puzzled. He couldn't understand a man for whom reputation, principle, and integrity were worth more than safety and comfort. But that's exactly the point. Cato was operating from a different set of values entirely, values so deeply held and clearly understood that no external pressure, however enormous, could dislodge them. You don't need to be Cato. You don't need to face down a military dictator to practice this. The value declaration happens in small moments every single day. When someone asks you to cut a corner that compromises your integrity, when someone pressures you to laugh at something cruel, when someone expects you to be silent about something that matters to you. In every one of those moments, you have a choice. And the Stoics would say, choose your soul. Every time. Your reflection question: do you know, with real clarity, not just as abstract ideals but as specific, lived principles, what your core values actually are? If someone pressured you to compromise them, could you articulate your response without anger, without apology, without wavering? Response 6. The measured withdrawal. But here's what most people miss. Not every situation demands a response. Not every conflict deserves your presence. Not every person who reaches toward you with hostility or manipulation or cruelty has earned the right to your engagement. The sixth response is perhaps the most difficult of all, not because it requires great words, but because it requires the discipline to offer almost none. The measured withdrawal. The calm, dignified decision to simply remove yourself. Not in anger, not in defeat, in clarity. And this is where it gets interesting, because our culture has convinced us, deeply, thoroughly convinced us, that walking away is a form of cowardice. That if we don't engage, we've somehow lost. That silence in the face of attack is surrender. The Stoics believed exactly the opposite. Epictetus wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." In other words, stop trying to make every hostile situation into something productive. Some situations are simply not productive. Some people are simply not ready for a real conversation. And the wise person recognizes this, accepts it without bitterness, and acts accordingly. The measured withdrawal sounds like this. I don't think this conversation is going to go anywhere useful right now. Let's revisit this another time. Or I'm going to step away from this for now. Or sometimes, in the most extreme cases, it requires no words at all. Just the quiet act of turning and walking towards something more worthy of your time and energy. There is an important story from the life of Marcus Aurelius that speaks directly to this. He was deeply devoted to his Stoic philosophy, and he surrounded himself, to the extent that he could, with people of genuine character, philosophers, writers, thinkers. But he also spent decades in the company of men who were scheming, corrupt, self-serving, and cruel. He could not always remove himself physically. His position did not allow it. But he could remove himself mentally, philosophically, emotionally. He could engage with the duties his role required without allowing the poison of other people's characters to seep into his own. He describes this in the Meditations almost as a practice, a daily intentional effort to remain distinct from the corruption around him, not by fleeing it, but by maintaining a part of himself that it simply could not reach. The measured withdrawal is about that inner space. It's about recognizing that your most precious resource is not your time, not your money, not your status. It is your attention. Where you place your attention, you place your life. And if you are pouring your attention into conflicts that have no resolution, with people who have no interest in truth or growth, you are not fighting a battle. You are depleting a resource that you cannot get back. This is especially important in the age we live in. The internet has made it extraordinarily easy to be drawn into conflict with people you will never meet, over topics that will not matter, at a cost to your peace that is very real and very significant. The Stoics never faced Twitter, but they faced the Roman Forum. They faced gossip, slander, political intrigue, public humiliation, and their answer was always the same: protect your inner world. Everything else is negotiable. Your reflection question: is there a conflict in your life, a person, an argument, an ongoing battle that you have been engaging with not because it is productive, but simply because the idea of walking away feels too much like losing? What if walking away were, in fact, the most powerful move available to you? Response 7. The long response. And now we arrive at the seventh and final response. And, in many ways, it is the most Stoic of all, because it operates not in the short term, but in the long one, not in the heat of a moment, but across the entire arc of a life. The seventh response is what I call the long response. It is the response you give not with your words, but with your character. Not today, not in this conversation, but over months and years and decades. It is simply this: becoming, visibly and undeniably, the person your values call you to be. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea so many times in his Meditations that it's clear he was writing it as much for himself as for any imagined future reader. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." He wrote, "Do not indulge in dreams of the great men you expect to become." He wrote, perhaps most powerfully of all, Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Be one. 2 words. 2 of the most demanding words in the entire history of philosophy. Because it's easy to talk about integrity. It's easy to read about virtue. It's easy to feel the warmth of Stoic wisdom in moments of calm, when no one is testing you, when nothing is at stake, when the sun is out and the people around you are kind. The test comes in the difficult moment. The meeting where someone takes credit for your work. The relationship where someone consistently treats you as less than you are. The family gathering where old wounds get salted. The public moment when someone tries to humiliate you and everyone is watching to see what you'll do. In those moments, those impossible, clarifying moments, the long response is the question, who am I going to choose to be right now? Not who do I want them to think I am, not who wins this exchange, who am I going to actually be? The Roman general Scipio Africanus, not technically a Stoic, but a man who embodied many Stoic virtues, was accused late in his career of corruption and misuse of public funds. His enemies had gathered evidence, prepared speeches, rallied political support. They brought him before the Senate to answer the charges. Scipio stood up. And instead of arguing, instead of presenting counter-evidence, instead of attacking his accusers, he said something extraordinary. He reminded the Senate of all the things he had done for Rome. He listed his battles, his campaigns, his decades of service. And then he said, on this day, which is the anniversary of the Battle of Zama, where I defeated Hannibal and saved Rome, on this day, I am going to the Capitol to give thanks to the gods. Those of you who love your country, follow me. And he walked out. The entire Senate followed him. His accusers were left alone. He did not win the argument. He transcended it. He reminded everyone, himself included, of who he actually was. Not in words, in presence, in decades of action, in the long response. Now hear me clearly. You may not be a Roman general. You may not have decades of battles to point to, but you have something equally powerful. The life you are choosing to build, one decision at a time. The integrity you are choosing to maintain, one difficult moment at a time. The character you are developing, day by day, in the quiet, unglamorous work of actually living by your principles. That is your long response. And it is the only response that ultimately matters. Because tactics change, words are forgotten, but character, real, consistent, proven character is something that accumulates. And over time, it becomes unmistakable. It becomes, in the truest sense, who you are. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve." And embedded in that advice is the recognition that the long response is not solitary. It is communal. It is built in relationship, with teachers, with students, with friends who call you forward, with opponents who challenge you to grow. Every difficult person in your life, every critic, every antagonist, every person who has ever tried to diminish you has, whether they intended to or not, offered you an opportunity to discover where your edges are, an opportunity to practice the principles you profess, an opportunity to become, in the fire of actual difficulty, someone who does not merely know about virtue, but embodies it. That is the gift hidden inside every conflict. The Stoics saw it. They named it. And they dedicated their lives to the practice of unwrapping it. Your reflection question for this final response, and I want you to sit with this one for a while. When the people who know you best look at your life, not your words, not your intentions, not your self-image, but your actual, observable choices over time, what do they see? Is the life you are living the long response you want to give? Let's bring these 7 responses together, not as a checklist, not as a script, but as a philosophy, a way of being in the world that the Stoics spent centuries refining, and that is just as powerful, just as necessary, and just as radical today as it was in ancient Rome. The first response, silence, that deliberate, steady, unshaken pause before you speak. The moment in which you demonstrate that you are not a machine that simply reacts, but a thinking, choosing, sovereign human being. The second response, the honest question, The act of meeting aggression or provocation with genuine curiosity, not as a trick, not as a manipulation, but as a real desire to understand before you respond. The third response, the unexpected agreement. The willingness to acknowledge what is true and a criticism even when it stings, even when the person delivering it was not kind. Because your commitment to truth is deeper than your commitment to comfort. The fourth response, the philosophical redirect. The ability to see beneath the surface of a conflict to what is actually driving it, and to gently, courageously, turn the conversation toward that real source. The fifth response, the value declaration. The clear, calm, unwavering statement of what you stand for. Not as a performance, not as a defense, but as an expression of a self-knowledge so deep that no external pressure can dislodge it. The sixth response, the measured withdrawal. The disciplined recognition that some conflicts are not worth your engagement, and that protecting your attention, your peace, and your inner life is not cowardice, but wisdom. And the seventh response, the long response, the most powerful of all. The life you are choosing to build day by day through countless small decisions, each of which adds another layer to the person you are becoming. Here is your Stoic challenge for tomorrow. Just one. Small, specific, and genuinely difficult. Tomorrow, and I mean tomorrow, not some abstract future day, when you encounter friction. When someone says something that activates that familiar heat in your chest, that impulse to defend or attack or explain. I want you to pause before you say a single word. Take one breath, one long, slow, conscious breath, and in that breath, ask yourself which of these 7 responses is actually called for here. What would Marcus Aurelius do? What would the version of me I want to become do? And then, not what habit wants to do, not what ego wants to do, but what you, in your clearest, calmest, most sovereign self, choose to do. Do that once tomorrow, and then again the next day, and the one after that. The Stoics did not believe in transformation. They believed in practice. Daily, unglamorous, quietly revolutionary practice. You don't have to become a philosopher overnight. You just have to begin. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to hear your answer. Leave it in the comments below. Which of these 7 responses is the hardest one for you personally? The silence? The honest question? The long response? Where do you break down under pressure? Tell me. Because this community is built on honest reflection, not performance, not pretense. And your answer might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If this kind of philosophy, deep, practical, genuinely challenging, is something you want more of in your life, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell. Because every week we go deeper into these ideas, not to feel good for 10 minutes, but to actually change how you live. And if this video reached you at a moment when you needed it, share it with someone who might need it too. That is, as the Stoics would say, a gift worthy of giving. I'll leave you with the words of Marcus Aurelius, words he wrote for himself, alone in the dark hours between battles and governance and loss and responsibility. Words that have survived 2,000 years because they are simply, exactly, unshakably true. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That strength is already in you. You were born with it. Every difficult experience you've survived has added to it. The only question that remains is whether you will choose to use it. Until next time, be well, think deeply, and live accordingly."